I think, Joseph, that point about mirroring, I think that really comes through when they have to hear themselves come through on the computer. A lot of when they first compose, really have difficulty hearing themselves coming from not their body, but from a tool. And it's almost, that's when they kind of have to, or some of them feel the awkwardness is what a lot of them described. The disembodied voice. But I think there's a unique opportunity there, is that it does allow them to kind of see themselves outside of themselves for a moment. Am I being authentic? Or am I faking it? And a lot of when students saw other students' digital media projects in lab, realized that they were faking it when they saw other students' work that seemed more authentic. And they were able to kind of appropriate that kind of reflection into their second project. Rebecca's got a really good question here.
Yeah, and it has to do with digital citizenship. I was just seeing something yesterday. It might have been in Facebook, or a reference to, I think, a news article about high school students who were using I forget the name of the app, but the one that's up for a very short period of time, and they were posing nude pictures, and so the becoming a digital citizen is a major event or responsibility.
And I do see it as a responsibility for educators. If we're literacy educators, where we have to teach our students to read and write for multiple purposes, for multiple audiences, and develop critical literacy, we need to develop these critical literacies in these kind of digital media environments, digital media places where they need to be able to understand that they need to take a critical stance to what they put on the web, specifically because it's permanent, it's copyable, it will not, you can't erase it like you can on a piece of paper, and I think that even makes it even more responsibility in doing that. And yes, literacy educators need to really be attuned to that. I have former students that I have on Facebook that post illegal activities, and I just, I can't get over the fact that why would you make public stuff like that? If you can't, if they don't have. And now I wish I could go back and teach them more about this, because I didn't really deal with this with my ninth graders then, but I wish now that I had, is kind of develop a critical sense when you're reading and writing in these digital places.
Megan, why don't you elaborate your question maybe by talking about the technical and whatever the other is, conceptual or content?
Okay, well, I was when I was reading that part about how your students' initial questions were about technique, Thor, which I imagine was like, how do I do the Ken Burns effect and stuff like those kinds of questions?
It was more of how do I turn off the Ken Burns effect. It's automatically on, and I have to teach them, because they automatically assumed it's automatically on there on iMovie, that it makes their piece more poetic.
Yeah. No, I mentioned that as an example because I know how much you love it. But the progression from questions about technique to questions about identity or maybe like larger issues. I mean, that's such a classic issue for any writing instruction, and I deal with it all the time with my students. And I recently was doing some observing in the writing center, and that's all that students talked about was surface level technical and mechanics issues. So how do you encourage that progression?
Those need to be dealt with first and foremost if you're able, in order to ever able to get them into the role of becoming an expert. You have to become kind of an expert in the technique of doing digital media. So I see that as kind of the first step in getting them familiar. I like the word familiar. Heidegger uses the word of becoming familiar with the world. Is that you're allowing them, you create a place in your, I call it the writing studio or digital media studio, I like that word better than lab, to allow them to become familiar with the tools first. And once they're able to become familiar with that, would go into the background. And then other questions about identity and self and our relation to the world starts emerging. But you have to take care of the technical aspects of apprenticing them in the technique, whether it be just writing or with composing with digital tools. I see very similar. I don't see it as being different, really.
Maggie disagrees, apparently. Do you want to say why, Maggie?
I understand that they need to know the techniques, but I think when you apply that idea to writing, that puts the cart before the horse and the editor before the thinker. And the thinker is the reason for writing. And the same, to me, is the idea that you're creating a digital story to say something. So it's only, I think, in concert that the two can be taught. So I think we have, for traditionally, especially in English ed, put the cart before the horse in that we teach them, onomatopoeia and rhyme as devices that sort of live in the world, but without our reason to use them, without our need to use them as tools of expression. So I think it's only when a student wants to say something that they think, now I don't want the Ken Burns. It shouldn't fade in. It should be sticking right there because of something I'm trying to say visually, that those techniques become useful. And I think of that too from Heidegger too, right? So the idea of ready to hand means we forget the tool we're using in service to the work we're doing. So that's why I was manic typing. Sorry, but I like the question because
I'm not trying to say that we have a class on technical. It's not that. It's just the lab is immersed in, you got to tell the story, and these are the purposes of telling the story. It's just, as a teacher in the lab, I'm more attuned to the first stories as them being more concerned with the technical rather than the other, where by story 3 now, the technical has gone to the background. They have become familiar with it, but they are asking the broader about the stories and their projections. But it's not, I don't say, let's do a worksheet with technical stuff like they do with writing. Let's do some editing, editing of long sentences.
Write a poem with 3 literary devices in it.
It's like getting thrown in the pool, but I'm the lifeguard that's standing outside the pool that will be there to rescue them.
It's a good point, Megan, too, because and what Sarah said, there's a certain comfort level that students have to have first. To me, the difference is that students that we get are immersed in digital experiences, and they have a cache, sort of a cache of tools that they're aware of, that they're not aware of them, but they're familiar with them because of movie and TV and music videos and watching all the video that they do. So to me, that's where students have sort of an understanding of, having seen the tools used, that they're not as aware of, I think, from my experience, of seeing them and knowing them in writing. So the devices and the techniques that are used by writers, sorry, Joseph, to say it like that, writers, is something that they're, I feel like, not as familiar with why they would do X, Y, or Z in writing as they are when they're in a digital setting, because, like you said, they're more comfortable with it.
I'm not sure they are, though. Having taught a lot of community college students who, frankly, come from completely distinct cultures and half the time don't have computers at home, I feel like this assignment would be really daunting to them. Word is a daunting program. I guess so. I kind of agree that I guess some forefronting would probably need to be done in order to add a comfort level to the point that they feel like they could pick up the pencil or the pen and write, and then hopefully be able to tell their story.
No, I agree, and they are afraid. Did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No, you're great.
I think they are afraid. They're afraid to write, many of them, but they're also afraid to construct digitally. And I think the only difference with their consumption is that they have, seen effects even that they want to do. You know what I mean? They'll see something that, I'm trying to think of a good example. I don't know, like the one I think of is the In Excess video where the people hold up signs and they take the signs away. You know what I'm talking about? Or is that before your time or after your time? But it's been done so many times that now students see that, and sometimes they'll be like, oh, that's a cool idea for me to express myself in this way, that I'm going to hold up these signs and put them away. That's something that I think is more accessible to them than the idea of, say, like, rhyme a meter in a poem or some. So anyway, that's all I meant. I think they're more.
You're making a really good point, Maggie, though, that like by doing it, they become more cognitive of the effects that are being done in the world. And in a way that I could see that being part of the peace and justice mission, because they're understanding and gaining the analytical abilities to go out and really be critical thinkers, what Thor was talking about.
Right, and they're not just interested in that way in the message, they are interested in the technique. You know what I mean? So like a person being like, I love the way Frost uses this meter, and it's completely something that he's doing that's like psychological. I want to do that same thing in my video because I know what that is. I didn't make that clear. Sorry, I have like a party going on downstairs. My mom just showed up and my kids are down there with her. So anyway, yeah, but I agree with you, Lisa.
I think by context, I mean like a safe space in which to work, but also an environment in which to create, right? So they're connected with both themselves and other writers who are learning the same process at the same time, and also a context of audience, right? And even maybe a context of expectations, right? That all of these things come together to help them learn to create a specific thing at a specific time for a specific purpose, that everything kind of aligns.
Did you read my chapter 5? That's in my chapter 5.
Now I'll get out of your brain.
That ends up being, I renamed the lab. I renamed what we call lab as writing studio, and I reflected on my time in an art studio where I was around in a studio with other painters and painted, created, and experimented. And I think, attuning your class or the studio to that format allows a safe place to be creative. How did I choose alchemy as a metaphor? Because I always had the picture that alchemy was synergistic, that you're creating you have these like base kind of materials and you're trying to create something special, gold. And I think with digital media, you're taking sound, text, images, and you're constructing this multimodal text. And to me, when it works synergistically, it is almost alchemical, where you're taking all these base things and making it into something more than the sum of the parts, I guess. That's kind of why I chose alchemy as a metaphor. And then I got into Jung for chapter 1. Because he uses it more of a metaphor for developing into a good, I would say, a good, healthy human being. And I think there's a lot in Emmanuel Levinas' work about caring. Because he takes Heidegger's being in the world, and he goes deeper into that one of the essences of that is being for another person, and it is the marriage of the self and the other. And that is metaphorically an alchemical relationship, that when you become an individuated person that's attuned to yourself and connected to the world, that's another reason why alchemy kind of works. Does phenomenology require a core text? No. A lot of phenomenologists use metaphors because metaphors kind of help name ideas that are hard to kind of put into words. So that's why a lot of phenomenology does use a lot of metaphor, because we're trying to put into writing the ineffable, something that you can't really feel that can't be kind of explained other than metaphorically, which all language is metaphorically anyway, going to what's metaphors we live by, Lakoff and Johnson. They would argue that all our language is metaphor.